Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly monumental piece of early church history. We're looking at an article by Mark Bates that explores the brilliant and, slightly controversial 4th century mind of Gregory of Nyssa. We're going to examine exactly how Gregory tried to synthesize the Christian story of redemption with Greek metaphysics, and here's the real kicker, the massive, completely unexpected consequences that had for the biblical story of Israel. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's a quick roadmap of where we're headed. We'll start in the fascinating weeds of Gregory's cosmic chemistry and his Platonic blueprint. Check out the vivid imagery of fishhooks and fire, and then we'll pull way back to look at the glaring omission of Israel, and finally, the clash of two fundamentally different worldviews. To really understand Gregory, we've got to understand his world. The 4th century was a time of intense, high-stakes theological battles. The Cappadocian Fathers, which of course included Gregory of Nyssa, were working overtime, reacting to major heresies like Arianism and Apollinarianism. They were fiercely trying to construct an airtight framework that safeguarded the belief that Jesus Christ was both fully God and fully human. But in doing so, Gregory made a really profound conceptual shift. See, Gregory shifted the entire concept of redemption away from a relational covenant or a legal pardon, and he essentially turned it into something that resembled an automatic, biological, or even chemical transfusion. The 19th century church historian Adolf von Harnack famously called this a physio-pharmacological system. Now that's a mouthful, but basically, instead of God just forgiving a legal crime, salvation in Gregory's mind was like a divine chemical injected directly into a diseased organism to actually alter its physical properties. So, you might be wondering, how exactly does a theologian arrive at a biological, chemical view of salvation? Well, we have to look at the underlying philosophy that makes Gregory's cosmic chemistry possible in the first place. Now, what's really interesting about this is how deeply committed Gregory was to Platonic realism. For him, human nature wasn't just a category or some collective noun for a bunch of individuals. No, it was a singular, real, concrete, universal entity. It was a what, not a who. Because of this ontological realism, he believed there was a radical, inescapable solidarity across the entire human species. Literally, whatever happens to this one giant universal human substance automatically affects every single individual copy of it. Gregory grounds this heavily in a highly unique reading of Genesis 1:27, a concept modern scholars call double creation. He essentially splits the creation of humanity into two distinct acts. First, God creates the ideal, universal human nature. It's completely incorporeal, non-gendered, and immortal. But then, foreseeing that this free, universal nature is absolutely going to fall into sin, God performs a secondary act. He adds physical animalistic distinctions, things like sex, reproduction, physical bodies, just to deal with the impending mortality. And this sets the absolute perfect stage for treating all of humanity as one single universal substance. And that brings us directly to the fall. In Gregory's model, original sin wasn't a forensic legal crime. It wasn't a broken contract. It was an ontological disease. It was a literal physical poison mixed right into the shared human lump. As Gregory vividly put it, it was like some deleterious ingredient spoiling the taste of honey. Because all of us share in this single universal nature, the disease of mortality and corruption just automatically infected every single particular human being. So if the problem is a physical ontological disease infecting the entire human lump, well, the cure has to be an ontological medicine, right? Let's look at the vivid mechanics of Gregory's model, where the incarnation of Jesus actually acts as a divine consuming fire, burning away the material wickedness in human flesh. Gregory applied this directly to the cross using a super dramatic version of the ransom theory. He argued that humanity lawfully belonged to Satan after the fall. God, being perfectly just, couldn't just use brute force to take us back. Instead, he offered Satan a trade, Jesus in exchange for humanity. But God actually engaged in what Gregory called a holy deception. And this brilliantly illustrates his whole point. The mortal human flesh of Jesus was the bait, and his hidden divine immortality was the hook. Satan swallowed the bait, but the unconsumed divine fire hidden inside absolutely shattered the gates of death from the inside out. But you have to ask, how does this cosmic victory reach us individually? Gregory relies heavily on sacramental realism. He says baptism physically joins the believer to the resurrection. The Eucharist, the bread and wine, acts as a literal, physical antidote. It's like a leaven in the stomach that transmutes our physical flesh from mortality straight to immortality. But actually, theologian David A. Brandos points out a massive systemic paradox right here. Think about it. If universal human nature was already perfectly deified and completely healed the moment Jesus became incarnate, why do individual humans still need the physical leaven of the sacraments to get the cure? It's a really fascinating logical tension. And this precise metabolic logic ultimately drives Gregory to his absolute most controversial conclusion: Apocatastasis, or universal restoration. His logic is that if you aren't purified in this earthly life, you'll just have to go through postmortem purgation. And we're talking about an excruciating, ages-long medicinal fire that melts away the diseased wickedness. But finally, in the end, everyone is restored. Why? Because mathematical Platonic realism demands it. Christ assumed the one universal human nature. If even one person, or heck, even the devil himself, remains eternally damned, then a piece of Christ's own assumed universal body remains permanently diseased. For the cure to work at all, it has to eventually heal every single rational being. Now, Gregory's system is undeniably a masterpiece of philosophical symmetry. It is mathematically gorgeous. But we really need to zoom out right now from the micro-substance of humanity to the macro-historical timeline, because the source article executes a major narrative pivot here. We have to hit the brakes and ask a really, really uncomfortable question. Where on earth does the historical story of Israel fit into this metabolic model? By turning salvation into this totally abstract metaphysical process occurring within a Platonic form called human nature, Gregory created a massive new problem. He almost completely ignored the actual Old Testament narrative. So the crucial point is this: when you rely entirely on an abstract, universal human nature, you completely lose the historical particulars. The concrete history of Israel, the covenants, the very real promises made to Abraham and David, they just disappear into allegory. The central tension of the entire New Testament, which is all about how Gentiles are grafted into Israel's story, is totally erased because ethnic identity just doesn't matter to Greek ontology. And so, entirely unintentionally, Gregory's beautiful metabolic model lays the heavy groundwork for structural supersessionism, where the church basically just absorbs and replaces the historical physical calling of ethnic Israel. And that leads us to a fascinating clash of worldviews. What we're really looking at here isn't just a critique of one 4th century bishop's theology. It's a deep dive into two fundamentally different ways of perceiving reality, and honestly, two completely different ways of reading the Bible. Let's move to and see how this builds into a really stark contrast. In one corner, we have Gregory's Hellenistic metaphysics. This is laser-focused on abstract ontology. It views the image of God as a non-physical Platonic form and treats the cross like bait in a cosmic sting operation. But in the other corner, we have the Hebraic cognitive environment of the canonical scriptures. This focuses on a covenantal, historical promise plan. Here, the image of God is a royal priestly vocation meant for physical humans on a physical earth, and the cross is seen as the supreme act of covenantal obedience by the Jewish Messiah. They are radically, fundamentally different frameworks. Scholars like Walter C. Kaiser Jr. remind us that the true organic architecture of redemption in the Bible isn't some kind of chemical transfusion. It's the promise plan. It's a progressive, unbroken, deeply historical arc that relies on the specific, historical trajectory involving Abraham, David, and the royal Messiah. Salvation is a historical, covenantal story between God and a specific people, not an abstract medical procedure performed on a universal form. Gregory of Nyssa absolutely gives us an unshakable confidence in the all-conquering love of God, and his system is undeniably brilliant. But it forces us to ask this final, vital question: do we gain cosmic mathematical symmetry at the dangerous cost of losing the very historical roots that anchor the story? It's a huge challenge to every single student of theology to find that delicate balance between grand philosophy and the actual gritty historical narrative of Scripture. I really hope this explainer leaves you eager to dig deeper into the early church and the incredible architecture of the biblical story.